The Way of the Cross, The Path to New Life. Art by Janet McKenzie. Words by Joan Chittester. Narrated by the Reverend Liz.Williams. I invite you to watch each slide, each station, then pause to consider both the art and the words. Before you continue. Station 1. Jesus is condemned to death. The spiritual challenge of the moment of public rejection is to maintain a strong sense of being in the hands of God. Drawing our personal sense of self now out of the well of the past, we go on because of what we know God wants us to be, rather than what we want people to think we are. Stripped of social approval, I come face to face with my need to be honest with myself. Who I know myself to be will determine what I must do to become whole again. It is inner growth we are about now, not social cosmetics. We are called to become the best of ourselves at the worst of times. How others treat us is not nearly as important now as what we know ourselves to be. We will not despair of God's mercy for us. We will not betray either our hope in God or our dignity of self. We are called, in the face of the injustices against us, to refuse to be less than we have always been spiritually. We are asked to remember that the God who created us, as Scripture says, wishes us well and not woe. We are called to rely on that, to be a sign to all that with God we can withstand anything. The first station, condemnation without cause, is a call to put our trust in God when the world around us has abandoned us, when there is little of our own internal resources left on which we may depend, when we find ourselves despised by those with whom we most wanted to succeed. Jesus, the model of inner strength at a time of serious public pressure, stands tall and strong in the face of injustice. He acknowledges the moment, but does not give in to it. He does not betray either his faith in God or his own consciousness of the will of God for him. Instead, he stands up to his accusers with dignity and strength. He does not grovel. He does not beg. He brings himself full and entire to a false trial, and he questions his accusers as much as they question him. He deals with the injustice arrayed against him with dignity, with honesty, with stolid commitment, and with undying determination to continue to say the truth all the way to the end. Station 2. Jesus takes up his cross. This station asks us all a very direct question. For what would you be willing to risk your life? What crosses do you yourself take on, knowing the risk, understanding the cost, and being committed to the consequences? The call of the second station is no small mission. It requires us to live life consciously, to know what's going on around us, to take some kind of responsibility, however small, for the welfare of others, for justice in the part of the universe we call our homes, our country, our world. This station calls for involvement in life. It calls us to leave the isolation of spiritual narcissism that treats the spiritual life as some sort of personal comfort zone designed to protect us from the world we live in. It requires us to make the journey from Galilee to Jerusalem ourselves, healing the sick, raising the dead, and bringing the gospel to a world long dead of soul. What we see in Jesus in the second station is a striking challenge. The second station of the cross teaches us that commitment costs. To choose one path in life from another is to choose its consequences. Real commitment implies that, like Jesus, we carry the burdens of our choices in bad times as well as good, on difficult days as well as easy ones, in the face of opposition as well as at times of great public or popular support. We pay the price of being true to ourselves, of doing what must be done when doing what could be done would be so much easier. When Jesus took up the cross, all hope for a miraculous end to an impossible situation was over, both for him and for us. The tariff of truth told on behalf of justice is often pain. The question with which the second station confronts us is a dangerous one. Having begun a good thing, will I pay the price to bring it to fulfillment? It's so easy to talk of great virtue, so simple to begin a thing. It's seeing it through the questions and criticisms and doubts and despair that really counts. Station 3. Jesus falls the first time. The day we fail in the face of everyone we have ever wanted to hear applaud us is the day of truth. That is the day we finally begin to determine what is really important in life. It is the time to pick one route or another for ourselves. But such a time is not an easy time. It means that we must be prepared to re-examine everything. We must ask ourselves what impels what we do, ourselves or the others who cheer as we go by. Now we are forced to look again at our goals in life. Are we living to make the world a better place, or ourselves a more powerful one? We need to ask ourselves how we really feel about the poor, the women, the immigrants, the one who is not like us. We have to determine what systems we really identify with in our hearts, the rich or the poor, the local or the international, the denomination or the universal. An experience of failure requires us to turn life upside down, to turn ourselves upside down. As a result of this process, we may well discover that what others may call success may actually be failure. It means that we must accept the fact that what others call failure may indeed be what rings through the ages as true. It is the dialect of the cross in which courage means more than security, and the coming of the reign of God means more than public success. Where's the power? Where now are the crowds who shouted, "Hail, King of the Jews"? The pain of the moment is about more than the pain we see on Jesus' face. We have some misgivings, some painful moments at this station ourselves, because we know the answer to those questions. The answer is that the image we hold so dear, the image of prophet, of rabbi, or healer and miracle worker, the image of the hero, is gone. What we call failure is not the falling down, the proverb says, but the staying down. The fact is that Jesus could have stayed down where he fell, having decided that he'd gone far enough, leaving it to his executioners to drag him the rest of the way. But he didn't. Instead, he showed us all that the important things in life are worth struggling for to the end. Station 4. Jesus meets his mother. The fourth station is the station of unconditional love, the kind of love that cannot be diminished under any conditions, regardless of any accusations, whatever the cost to the self. This is the love that is godly, that does not judge, that stands by, that knows the best and believes in it. It is the best a human can do, whoever the person, whatever the crime. To grow in the spirit of the fourth station, We must learn to do the same, to love without boundaries, to love without censure, without condemnation. Love lets the rest of the world do that. It is for the lover to simply accept what is and stand by to see it through. There is in the common bond between Jesus and Mary a unity of hearts formed by the pangs of pain. Having borne his body, she is now bearing the weight of his soul in hers. There is no recrimination here, only acceptance. There is no distance here, only a melding of hearts that is beyond anything merely physical. This station teaches us the freedom that comes with real love. Jesus and Mary meet under the worst of circumstances. He has become an enemy of the state, an outcast from the synagogue. She is a widow left alone in a male world, without the sustenance of her son, and no visible means of support. Both of them are condemned to death. Shouldn't he live his life to please her? Shouldn't she demand from him his conversion to the ways of the world around him, for his sake, of course, but for hers as well? Isn't that what good sons, good parents, good friends, good lovers do? The answer is yes, only if we believe that anyone, our teachers, our parents, the people we love in life, has more claim on our soul than God does. The answer is yes, only if we think that love requires molding a person to ourselves rather than changing ourselves, giving ourselves, so the good of the other is realized. In this case, mother and son love one another enough to respect the place of God in both their lives. Station 5. Simon helps Jesus carry his cross. The function of the follower of Christ is to get involved. The people we call outcasts in a society riven by poverty, war, racism, and sexism are the crucifixion figures of our time, bowed down under the weight of injustice, suffering from a system that has made them outcasts, invisible, pariah. The people we do not see, have not known, or never associate with on the back streets of our cities need our voices raised in their behalf, our hearts softened on their behalf, our souls open to lives far unlike our own. The fifth station of the cross demonstrates for us the power of presence in the life of the poor and oppressed, being where suffering is, associating ourselves with it, standing with those whom society has condemned, is a great and gracious witness. At life's greatest moments, we choose it. Sometimes, if we're lucky, we find ourselves in one of life's great acts, whether we want to be there or not. Then we so often discover that it is not so much what Simon did for Jesus as what Jesus did for Simon that counts. Then we learn to recognize that by the very fact of our coming face to face with the other, Jesus is changing our life too. What are we being called to do for someone in need right now, for which we are a disinclined observer? What does the situation have to offer us as well? When we open our hearts to the other in need, we are very likely to discover that our own hidden needs have been healed in the process. Station 6. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. In Veronica's mild, womanly way, there is embedded a striking call to authenticity, to being what we are meant to be, to doing what must obviously be done no matter who approves, no matter who thinks this is neither the place nor the time. It takes the breath away to imagine stepping out in the middle of a street gang to wash the face of a beaten boy, It takes an inner strength beyond the average level of integrity to speak up for women in a crowd of conservative churchmen. It takes a kind of spiritual insanity to question the corporate practices everyone else takes for granted at the cocktail party. But it is precisely that kind of commitment Veronica takes for granted. She haunts us with it. She pursues us with it. She insists on it. Nowhere are we to allow the Jesus figures of our day, the poor and the oppressed, to suffer where we are. It is a mandate more demanding than sinlessness. This station calls us to realize that compassion is the counterpart of justice. To fail to practice mercy in the presence of injustice is to neglect half the face of God. Jesus does not resist the journey to the cross, but he does respond most to the act of comfort in the midst of oppression. It is not enough, we learn here, to harbor a sense of righteous anger when the poor are oppressed. It is necessary to reach down and lift them from the pit of their despair. It's a false zeal that focuses on the addiction but ignores the addict, that calls others to family values but gives no child beyond our own a helping hand, that deplores discrimination but avoids gays and lesbians. The plight of Jesus here is a clear model for us. Justice punishes criminals, yes, but mercy refuses to ignore their needs. Justice seeks the vision, but mercy makes it real. Justice follows the ideal, but mercy recognizes the weakness in ourselves and so holds the weaknesses of others in a tender hand. Station 7. Jesus falls the second time. The spiritual life is not a walk in the breeze. It is the solemn, sacred effort to make life count, to make good on what we set out to make of ourselves, to become the wholeness of our spiritual selves. And the energy it takes is exhausting, but the spirit it takes to keep going on past the physical, psychological, spiritual ability to go on is of the essence of greatness. The call to holiness, to witness, to commitment is undeniable now. The Jesus who falls a second time gets up a second time, determined to see this cross through to the end. The call to live our lives to the pinnacle of the truth within us, however impossible it may seem along the way, is a clarion one. We are each here to give our best and give our all in the service of the will of God for us. There is no going back. There is no staying down when we fall down. We bother to get up and try again because we said we would. There is only the answer of Isaiah, "Here I am, Lord, send me." This station reminds us that obstacles are a regular, a normal, even a necessary part of life. It is the obstacles we meet along the way, the problems we overcome, the setbacks we survive, that measure the value of the enterprise at hand. They give us both perspective and wisdom. Once we have stumbled but continued the race, collapsed but not quit, fought and endured, no pain is too much, no cost too heavy to pay for what it is worth our laying down our lives for it. Is there anything important enough in our lives, our goals, our faith, for which we are willing to endure both pain and doubt, even when going on seems to be impossible? Is there any pain worth more than the desire to run away from it? And if not, what kind of spiritual life can possibly be sculpted out of a life lived only on the surface of glitz and the passing pleasures of the moment? Station 8. Jesus meets the weeping women of Jerusalem. The call is twofold. First, we are challenged to put down the judgments and the prejudices that turn societies into social prisons. We are called to open our lives to the souls of those whose social behaviors repulse us, but whose state is more than the result of the social system itself, than it is of any act of their own. Then we are called to change the society in which this kind of oppression and injustice is permitted to go on unchecked and even unnoticed. We are called to look again at those we ignore, but this time we are called to look with care. We are called to really see the situations in which they live. We are called to forego the criticism that condemns people whose lives and circumstances we do not know to the margins of society forever. We are called to realize that we ignore these people to our peril as well as theirs. This station compels us to consider the long-range implications of our actions. It tells us that justice must come, or we will all suffer for the lack of it. To seek justice without doing mercy, to do mercy but not to seek justice is, in both instances, to live a partial life. To feed the hungry but fail to question the policies that make people hungry or leave people hungry neglects the real issue. Don't weep for me, Jesus tells the women of Jerusalem. Weep for yourselves and your children. The implication is clear. If this society continues on the road that it is on now, it dooms itself to the effects of such policies. Don't weep for the people on death row. In other words, weep for the kind of society that would stoop so low as to become what it hates. Do we really reject what we call sinful, or do we really reject only the sinners themselves? The question brings us to face ourselves at our deepest, darkest core. This station calls us to go beyond what is to what must be. Station 9. Jesus falls the third time. The call of the ninth station is to give up doing what the world needs to have done simply because we do not succeed at it on the first try. The call is to see failure as part of the process of our lives and to learn from it accordingly. There is no call as important as refusing to quit doing what is worth doing. This station demands that we persevere in doing good, in being what we must be, in holding our course even when the pressures around us mount to break our spirits. Just when we think we have come to a plateau in life, things change. The job disappears. The home begins to fragment. Sickness slows us down. Relationships break our heart. It all seems useless. All the efforts seem to be for nothing. Then it is time to realize that there is nothing we now take for granted in life that wasn't first considered either untenable to do or insane even to think about. That's when getting up and starting over becomes one of the miracles of life. When Jesus falls, Jesus certainly wants to quit. But Jesus' life was about accepting the consequences of love and justice. Whatever that might be, quitting was not an option. Are we about something impossible enough to be worth every effort of our lives? And if not, why not? What great contact? What inconceivable race is life about for us? Since when did complacency become a virtue when love is in need of repair and truth is in need of proclamation? If we are not involved in something that demands the unstinting best of us and threatens the very core of us, what is life about? Station 10. Jesus is stripped of his garments. The spiritual summons of this station is to the development of genuine humility. The call is not an enticing one to most Westerners, whose social goals consist primarily of superiority, primacy, advantage, and transcendency. To even think of wanting less, society leads us to believe, is a kind of betrayal of the self. Be all that you can be is more an expectation than encouragement. As a result, somewhere along the way, humility, one of the ancient virtues, has come to be seen as the suppression of the self. Humility has become confused with humiliation. But never doubt that humility and humiliation are not synonyms. Humiliation defaces the soul. It leaves us stripped and vulnerable in a world of mockery. But humility, true humility, makes humiliation impossible. Humility is self-knowledge. It is the state of mind achieved by total openness before the God of unconditional love. The humble person is the one who knows who he or she really is and puts on no airs in an attempt to pretend otherwise. Humble people know, too, that God knows exactly who they are and loves them totally nevertheless. What you see in the humble person is what they are, and what they are is what you see. They have no fear of exposure because they have never pretended to be anything more, anything other, than the most stripped-down presentation of themselves implies. They are simply one more person among the persons of the world. We know them when we see them, and we love them at first sight. This station confronts us with the inevitable in every life. Somewhere along the way, we each get stripped of what we have spent our lives acquiring, of things closest to our hearts, of possessions or positions that made us who we thought we were. Then, thrown back upon ourselves, we are left to discover who we have really become. The problem is, of course, that we don't miss what we don't have within us until we need it most. It's only at the point when we realize who we are, not that we are ready to become someone worthwhile. What is underneath the garments of pomp, authority, dignity, and wealth that we have so carefully cultivated around us? Anything at all. The Jesus who stands before us naked and unashamed, dignified and full of conviction, is calling us to pay more attention to who we are than what we have so cunningly conspired to pretend to be. Station 11. The call of this station is the call to faith. To believe that a loving God is also present in darkness so deep that nothing can possibly assuage it. It is the call to faith in the God of timelessness in a time of total defeat. It is trust that the God who created us and loves us will hold us up through this moment so that the darkness does not break our hearts. This station brings us all to face the moments when we know we must do what we do not want to do, and more than that, feel we cannot possibly do, however it changes our lives. When what we know to be right exacts more from us than we think we can give, then Jesus nailed to a cross is our only hope, that one day the cross we seek to avoid will have been worth the climbing. The cross is what we feel when the project flounders and fails without reprieve, when the love disintegrates, when the position is over, when all the supporters go away, and when life in the future appears to be shapeless and gray, totally deprived of the heartbeat of hope. Then we begin to realize that life's real problem does not lie in being nailed to a cross. It lies in choosing a cross that is too small to even attempt to justify being nailed to it in the first place. When we spend our energies on small things, when we spend our lives chasing dreams that do not satisfy, we suffer as much to love them, but for far too small a reason. Are we spending our lives, our hopes, our emotions on something great enough to make the pain of losing them worthwhile? The great task of the spiritual life is to choose to spend it on something big enough to risk the pain of its loss. Station 12. Jesus dies on the cross. The call to us at a time when great pieces of the future crumble in life is not so much to faith as it is to hope. Depression is the seedbed of hopelessness, the loss of surety that life must still somehow be full of good, however impossible it is to remember it, to see it, to trust it at this moment. Hope does not tell us that soon life will be the same again as it was before the loss. No, hope tells us that life goes on. Differently, yes, but goes on nevertheless. Hope tells us that the pieces are there for us to put together, if only we give ourselves to the doing of it. When Jesus dies on the cross, something entirely different rises, and that something is the call to us to make the best in life live again. This station brings us face to face with the finality of defeat. Sometimes things don't have a happy ending in life. They just grind on until loss becomes the new normal. Sometimes we fail. There are things we are not suited to do, however much we want to do them. Then valor lies in simply being willing to begin again somewhere else. Sometimes we're beaten. Sometimes we're lost. Sometimes we're humiliated. Sometimes we're misunderstood. Sometimes we are abandoned by the very people we love most in life, and who we thought also loved us. At that point, without doubt, something in us dies. Then we learn that there's no going back to the things that once were, but are no more. The old breath goes out of us, and all we can do is surrender to the dark. It is not a pretty moment. It can take all the energy we have. Am I able to accept the daily deaths of life, both the great ones and the small, knowing that death is not the end of life, only it's passing over to something new in me? Hopefully, I learn from the Jesus who gave up himself, his mission, his life, in ways that all seem totally wrong, that the death I died may bring new life to the world around me as well. Station 13. Jesus is taken down from the cross. The call to the unknown is the call to trust what is behind the mist of life to come. It is the challenge to believe that in the darkness there is yet another life to be had. Such spiritual gambling is not an easy virtue. The decision to trust that tomorrow will be better than this worst of days is the least of human instincts. The willingness to start all over again at any point in life comes with great reservation. Better to bear the evil that we have than to fly to what we do not know, we say. The inclination to hold on, even to the less than beautiful, is part of being human, part of being inclined to hoard life rather than to live it with arms open and head up, facing the winds of the day and believing that the destination we cannot see is just as good or better than the one to which we have already set the sails of our hearts. Trust is the gift that makes life exciting. It is the golden thread between the human search for the fullness of life and the heart of God that wills it for us. This station, with its specter of irrevocable loss, its futile efforts, its wasted dreams, drains the human soul to the point of numbness. Can anything worse be imagined than the death of an ideal? When Jesus is taken down from the cross, when hope dies, when everything we ever wanted gets thrown away, discarded, overlooked, ignored, forgotten, we eat the dust of despair. We wonder what life was ever about if this is all it came to, despite all the goodwill, all our great struggles to have it be otherwise. Then we realize that only God is God, that we are not. We are not in charge of time or truth or the architecture of our definition of the perfect world. Then we understand. This next step is, like Jesus, to give ourselves over to the arms of God and trust. Am I prepared to let go of everything I ever wanted so that God's will can come through me in another way? Station 14. Jesus is laid in the tomb. We can see now that the call of the stations of the cross is not to death and despair at all. The call of the stations of the cross to those who walk them, burdened by their own lives, at risk of losing faith, in the very throes of an impenetrable darkness of the heart, is to take what is good from the past and go forward with it into a future pulsing with new life. This station brings us to grapple with the grace of closure. Some phases of life end and cannot be retrieved. They go by before we're ready to see them go. Worse, their going may feel like ignominy at the time, or may even look to the world like failure. Then the finality of loss may sting with grave injustice, and may grieve us beyond all telling of it. Yet only in the ability to realize that life goes on from one stage to another, from one kind of presence to another, can we ever come to new life. When Jesus submits to the death of his ministry, when Jesus allows both state and synagogue to still the thunder of his voice, one life ends so that another can begin, ours as well as his, so that the echo of his might thunders on in us. Station 15. The Resurrection. Perhaps the most difficult dimension of the stations of the cross is that, lacking a sense or slightest awareness of resurrection, they leave the Christian standing at the edge of the tomb, numb, lost, bereft, without a single thought of what comes next. Christians are the people of the empty tomb. We are Alleluia people, Augustine writes, and Alleluia is our cry. We are not meant to see the crucifixion as an endpoint. We are not to center the entire spiritual life there. The focus of our faith is the awareness that the Christ who lives beyond the cross calls us beyond it as well. It is the resurrection that brings faith to wholeness, to more than the mere acceptance of the dour reality of life here, to what the Church to this day calls this valley of tears. We have reason, the resurrection reminds us, to believe in the ultimate blessedness of life, even in the midst of its natural sufferings. Our life, too, the resurrection says, does not end here. The call of the resurrection is to hope, to know that there is life beyond this life, to know that what we know of blessing here is only a fraction of the life to come. In the placid face of Jesus, we see the foundational serenity of the universe, the presence of another life that will make this one eventually and eternally fulfilled. We see, too, the marks on his hands that attest to what it takes to come to the whole of life within us, the willingness to grapple with evil, the strength to give ourselves over to love that is not lust, the determination to make our own lives worthwhile for others, and finally, the courage to refuse to give in to the forces of spiritual slavery around us. The resurrection, the inner call to the eternal more, to the sense of undying life within us, is the magnet that keeps us moving through life, in quest of its mystery, in certainty of its truth.